Welcome to Unit 2 of the ESPT training. Module 4 builds on Module 3 and covers site selection and survey type. As a reminder, this training model corresponds to Module 4 of the ESPT, which I encourage you to have in front of you during this course. By the end of this module, you should be able to distinguish the different types of entomological surveillance sites and surveys described in the ESPT, and use the ESPT to select sites to most efficiently address the priority program question or questions using available resources. Before we get started, let's revisit our training checklist. First, we recommend that you have either a digital or paper copy of the ESPT in front of you. And please also have a notepad and writing utensils such as a pencil or pen. We ask that you retain your program question or questions identified in Module 1, as well as your indicators selected in Module 2, and your methods chosen in Module 3. Remember that each module builds on the previous model. VoiceOver is recommended. The orange background slides signal our illustrative example, and finally, the gray background slides signal an applied exercise that can be done individually or as a group. You should plan about 10 to 20 minutes for each exercise. At this point in the ESPT training course, you should have defined your priority program question by working through Module 1, selected the appropriate indicators to address your question in Module 2, and determined which sampling methods would be most appropriate to collect the data you need in Module 3. If this is your first time working through the ESPT, it's important that you work through Module 4 only after you have worked through and understood Modules 1, 2, and 3. Module 4 describes 3 site types and presents 4 survey types. We will explore how Module 4 guides you in determining the appropriate site type and survey type to address your priority program question. So let's begin. For understanding Module 4, it is helpful to understand several key concepts. To begin with, the ESPT refers to 3 site types: sentinel site, focus site, and targeted site. A sentinel site is a fixed site that is part of a network of sites representing different ecological and epidemiological regions of a country, such as areas with high receptivity and importation risk and areas with risk of re-establishment. Entomological surveillance that is based at a sentinel site is important for measuring trends over time. The next site type is only used in the context of malaria elimination when there are relatively few remaining pockets or foci of transmission. In this situation, a focus site is a defined location in a currently or previously malarious area that contains the epidemiological and ecological factors necessary for malaria transmission. A focus site might be a village or a small cluster of neighboring villages. Entomological surveillance in a focus site is important to inform the most effective response to reduce and interrupt transmission. Finally, a targeted site is a site assigned for a spot survey to answer a specific question or questions. This site could include an area experiencing an outbreak or an area experiencing an increase in importation risk or receptivity. 4 different types of survey can be conducted at the 3 sites we just discussed. A baseline survey characterizes transmission in a previously uncharacterized area. This may inform intervention selection and deployment and evaluate current interventions. A routine survey monitors changes in vector populations over time, which may be due to the interventions in place. They can be used to identify emerging gaps in protection. A focus investigation can be triggered either by detection of an index case in a given area or by persistent transmission in a non-active focus site. Finally, a spot survey is time-bound and targets a specific area with 1 or more questions in mind. First, let's start by looking at how survey types and site types relate to each other. As mentioned, the ESPT identifies 3 different site types and 4 survey types. Site selection for entomological surveillance activities is based on 3 key considerations. First, you should always select your sites based on your priority program question or questions. Second, Your site type depends on what survey type is needed to address your question. And third, it's important to think about how heterogeneity in malaria transmission, importation risk, and receptivity might affect your site selection. Ultimately, site selection is heavily influenced by the available capacity in the country in which you're working, and there is no right or wrong number of sites to select. What is key is to do your best to select sites that are in line with your program priorities and available capacity. Priority should always be given to areas with higher malaria transmission. This means that you should always be sure to examine the epidemiological data to assist with your planning of entomological surveillance activities. In the next two slides, we'll first look at Table 10, which helps you link survey types to their respective site type. And then we'll explore how Figure 3 can help you with your site selection process in the context of your program objectives. Table 10 provides more information on each of the four survey types by showing the sampling site and minimum sampling frequency within a year by different survey types. The first column to the left indicates the four survey types. The second column suggests triggers for initiating a given survey type. For example, a focus investigation might be needed because an index case was reported. The last column in the table indicates the minimum frequency of sampling across years. As mentioned previously, available funding and capacity affects the scale and frequency of sampling, and your program might have to make adjustments to achieve an entomological surveillance program that is feasible and sustainable. To help your program prioritize where and how often to sample, follow the epidemiological data and focus on areas where malaria transmission is higher. How do we choose where to put our sites? Figure 3 of the ESPT can help answer this question. First, I'll explain how to walk through this tree, and then I'll go over an example to show you a direct application of this tree to help us with site selection. Figure 3 is a decision tree that helps you select sites based on various programmatic objectives. We'll zoom in on different parts of this tree over the next few slides. To begin, start by reading each of the objective boxes, then continue down the branch corresponding to your specific program objective. For instance, let's say my program wants to evaluate the appropriateness of LLINs as an intervention in Katosha. The first objective box on the left side of the tree includes intervention evaluation, so I would continue down the left branch. Working through the left branch, I'm quickly informed that the appropriate site type for my priority program question is the Sentinel site. The remaining steps of the branch provide guidelines on how to select specific Sentinel sites based on receptivity and stratification. Let's move on to the next slide to look closer at this section. The Sentinel site selection of the tree helps determine where and how many Sentinel sites you need. First, stratify your country by epidemiology. Second, include intervention presence and ecological zones in this stratification. And third, outline the operational units over this stratification. Including operational boundaries helps with logistics and budgeting. Select at minimum one Sentinel site per stratum. Unfortunately, there is no data that clearly tells us how many sites is the correct number of sites. Therefore, programs should consider funding and capacity in addition to eco-epidemiological criteria to prioritize which sites to select for entomological activities. The middle branch of Figure 3 deals with foci of transmission, which I remind you are areas that are considered to have the continuous or intermittent epidemiological factors conducive to possible and or existing malaria transmission. Theoretically, each new focus of transmission should be investigated, and each focus site is classified and its status updated continuously. A site with active transmission is a focus site where malaria transmission is ongoing. A residual non-active site is a focus site where transmission was interrupted recently, that is, in the last 1 to 3 years. And a cleared site is a focus with no local transmission for over 3 years. While entomological collection should occur in active foci at least once a year, Entomological surveillance in residual, non-active, and cleared sites may occur depending on program objectives and questions, as well as available resources. Now let's get to the last branch of Figure 3 in the next slide. Targeted sites are simply sites that are selected to address a specific question for a spot survey occurring outside established sentinel and foci sites. Targeted sites are usually selected based on epidemiological data. For example, a targeted site might be a district experiencing an outbreak, and the program decides to conduct a spot survey to understand the drivers of this outbreak. Their question might be, are current interventions working, and what are the remaining gaps in protection? And who is being infected with malaria and where? In the next slides, let's go over an example of how Figure 3 can help us with site selection. In this example, our country's national malaria program needs to optimize their current LLIN strategy. The NMP asks two priority program questions. The first is, when and where should LLINs be deployed? The second is, what are the remaining gaps in protection? Baseline data is generally weak. In certain areas, there has been no entomological data collection in the last 6 years, while in other areas, the recent data is incomplete. The NMP has capacity for 7 sites across the country. Let's use Figure 3 to help us select these 7 sites. Using the first step in Figure 3, we can confirm that we are indeed seeking to select sentinel sites. We know that baseline data is non-existent or incomplete. We are aiming to evaluate when and where LLINs should be deployed. And finally, we seek to describe the remaining gaps in protection. Therefore, sentinel sites are the right site type for the NMP's program objectives. Following the guidance in Figure 3, using the entomological data we do have, we identify 3 receptive areas and 2 non-receptive areas in our example country. A receptive area is a place where humans and vectors are present together. This information helps us prioritize where we will focus our resources for site selection. Since we only have capacity for 7 sentinel sites, we decide to only focus on the 3 receptive areas in blue, green, and yellow at the bottom of this slide. Priority should always be given where transmission is known to occur or to potentially occur. Next, we stratify each area by epidemiology. In our example, each receptive area has 2 high transmission zones and 2 low transmission zones. Still working down Figure 3, we then continue the process by stratifying each area by the current interventions in place. In our example, LLINs are present in all villages, but coverage varies. We map each of these villages and report LLIN coverage. We then also stratify by ecological zones. Here, Area 1 has wetlands in the high and low transmission zones. Area 2 has lowlands in both low and high transmission zones. And Area 3 has grasslands in both high and low transmission zones. Then we stratify by operational units. Operational units are important to map because of their role in planning and implementation of vector surveillance and control activities. In our example, each district oversees their own entomological surveillance activities. Each area corresponds to 1 province, and in each province there are between 2 and 4 districts. Next, in the last step of Figure 3, we are instructed to select our sites based on obtained stratification. At this point, we have identified 2 epidemiological strata in each province, high transmission and low transmission. We have also identified 3 ecological strata, wetlands, lowlands, and grasslands. And in each province, we have identified 2 to 4 districts. We can also specify strata by long-lasting insecticide-treated net coverage, high from 80% to 100%, medium from 50 to 79%, and low below 50%. Therefore, when the epidemiological, ecological, administrative, and long-lasting insecticide-treated net coverage strata are overlaid with each other, we obtain at least 12 strata of combined characteristics such as high transmission, wetland, and high coverage of long-lasting insecticide-treated nets, or low transmission, grasslands, and medium, long-lasting insecticide-treated net coverage. Finally, still in the last step of Figure 3, we proceed to selecting our sentinel sites. We prioritize areas of high transmission and villages where long-lasting insecticide-treated net coverage is low. We also try to select sites representative of the different ecological parameters represented in this example. The red circles represent the selected sentinel sites. You can see that we have more sentinel sites in areas of high transmission and low long-lasting insect-saturated net coverage. Great, we have completed Module 4 and we are ready to dive into the exercise. For this exercise, you will need to recall the priority program question you identified during Module 1 and that you worked with in Modules 2 and 3. First, review Figure 3 to determine which site type is appropriate based on your program question. And second, use Table 10 to decide on sampling frequency that is most appropriate for your priority question. Excellent. You have now completed Module 4 of Unit 2. At this stage, you should be able to formulate your program question. Use your program question to guide the selection of indicators to address this question, and select vector sampling and lab methods, including human behavior and HRP survey methods to better describe vector human contact points, and identify the survey type and site type that is most appropriate for your priority program question. Up next is Module 5. This module will cover sampling design for operational purposes, and we invite you to proceed to that module now. On behalf of UCSF's Malaria Elimination Initiative, thank you for listening, and we hope that this was a productive session.